Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi Kalayim, Pedig Dalet, Halacha Aleph, and Halacha Beis. We're going to conclude Halacha Aleph by learning one final ruling regarding the Mechoil HaKerem topic that we have been learning about on the previous daf, regarding the vineyard's perimeter and the stringency that you cannot plant just beyond the 4 amas, which is the general rule regarding a kerem. But if you have the perimeter, in other words, a kerem is surrounded by a wall, then you have to have lebeis hillel at least 12 amas or more for you to be allowed to plant in the middle of it. And Chevra Halacha Beis is going to be premised on the rule that when you have a wall, one is allowed to plant, whether it is 2 different types of zeroyim, or whether it is even by kilei hakerem. That means that you can plant, let's say, a vineyard all the way up to the wall from one side, and no matter how thin the wall is, you can plant on the immediate other side any other plant, any other product. And the Mishnah is going to teach us various rules or halachic definitions of a wall. How do you define a wall? Now, we're not going to be speaking about the wall's height. We're not going to be speaking about the wall's width, but we will be speaking about what were to happen if you have physical openings in the wall. Now, there's something called a pesach, let's say an entranceway. There's something called a pirza. A pirza would mean a breach. So we're going to learn the rule of lavud. We're going to learn the law of pesach versus pirza, which is the rule that if the opening, if the breakage, if the absence in the wall is more than 10 amas, we consider that a breached wall. If it's less than that, 10 amas or less, then we consider that to be only a pesach. We're going to have another rule, the rule of parutz, meruba al ha'omed versus omed meruba al haparutz. In other words, we're going to have some basic definitions of a wall. We're going to have, the Gemara is going to quote a brisa that will actually give exceptions to the rule in the Mishnah, both l'chula and l'chumra. We're going to have in the Gemara the topic of tzuras ha-pesach. And Chavra, all of these rules regarding a wall we find concerning Hilchas Shabbos. And we're going to have a machlokes in Amoraim whether we will completely correlate the laws of a mechitza from Shabbos to the laws of Kalayim, or whether we're going to say that they are not completely the same. We will actually discover that, at least at first look, it appears for there to be a foundational machlokes between the Bavli and the Yerushalmi in the laws of mechitzos. So, Chevra, people that are fresh with Hilchas Eidevin basically are going to become very familiar with the halachas that we will learn right now. The Gemara there concerning Hilchas Eidevin and Hilchas Shabbos, right? How do you make a Yerushalmi Hayachid? By closing in an area. There will be many rules that we are already familiar with. And again, we're going to have a debate whether they're mamish the same or whether there will be areas in which we separate the laws of Shabbos. We're going to call it Hilchas Shabbos, even though it's also connected to Hilchas Eidevin, but it's connected all to the law of Shabbos that you cannot carry Daladamas B'Rishus Harabim, B'chulei, and Hilchas Kalayim. Okay, without any further ado, Kevin, if I can just ask you maybe to put the silence on your machine, that will be great. We're going to Daf Lamed Ches, if I didn't say that before. And we're going to Daf Lamed Ches, Amud Aleph, the last word, 3 lines from the top of the Amud. And again, like we mentioned, that we're going to be learning a final ruling regarding Mechoil Haker. Says the Gemara. And Kevin, we're going to need pictures for this. That Rabbi Yaakov Bar Idi says in the name of Reish Lakish, really in the name of Reb Shimon ben Lakish, that's his full name, that Ho Yeshamakim Shtei Mesrei Amam Nital Hamachoil. which means if you can take a look at the first picture, for people that have a art scroll, look at 38A1, the one to the left. If you have the one to the left, if you have a kerem, and there is a wall, but the walls is not following exactly the alignment of the vineyard, but the wall at one point is relatively far away from the vineyard. The wall is going in an angle. So as the wall is going, let's just say from east to west, it's getting closer and closer to the vineyard. And we learned in the Mishnah that if you don't have 12 amas, you may not plant anything, even though you're planting it beyond 4 amas from the vineyard. So says Rabbi Yaakov Bar Idi in the name of Yerushalmi ben Lakish, a leniency that I don't need for the entire wall to be away from the kerem at least 12 amas or more. I don't need that. Now, it's not clear how much of the wall needs to be 12 amas away. We'll see right now on Machlokes in the Shita of Reish Lakish. But let's begin with the general, that if there is a part of the wall that's 12 amas away, even if the wall again is going in an angle and other parts of the same wall is getting closer and closer to the kerem, you will still be allowed to plant as long as you're going 4 amas away from the kerem. Now, how much of the wall has to be 12 amas away? In other words, nital hamachol, the stringency of the mochel hakerem, that even though you're more than 4 amas away, but since you don't have 12 amas, you're not allowed to plant in the perimeter. If you have at a point, we'll see again how long. If you have the distance of 12 amas, then you're good. Then you are allowed to plant. How much of it? So machlokes. Amar Rabbi Chizkiya, I'll tell you how much. Ubavat shteim esrei al shteim esrei. Yeah, it gave in the top picture on the right column. I got it. It doesn't have to be the entire wall, but you have to have at least 12 amas of width that are fully 12 amas away. Once you have that, even though the wall is continuously getting closer and closer to the vineyard, but that is what Reish Lakish says. But if you don't have 12 amas of width, then you cannot plant between the kerem and the other parts of the wall at all, because you don't have the 12 amas. Amar Rabbi Mana, I'll tell you what Reish Lakish meant. He meant something even more lakula, the bottom picture. Afilu meitzer v'hoylach. Even if there's only one nakuda in the picture, it's all the way to the left. There's only one point that is 12 amas away, and the wall is right away. The wall was placed at an angle. It's not aligned with the same exact direction of the vines in the rows. If you have one nakuda that's 12 amas away, then you are not restricted by the stringency of Machoil HaKerem. Guys, one thing is clear. You will always need to plant 4 amas away from the vineyard. No one will get away from that. But as long as you are able to do it, then you can plant in that perimeter. And with that, we make a siyum on halacha aleph, and then we're beginning halacha beis, and really we're beginning to learn. I can call this hilchas mechitzos. Okay, says the Mishnah that when you have again the base rule, then is that whoever's joining right now, it's perfect. It means you don't need to have any other information other than the one that I'm sharing right now. That when you have a wall, as long as it is defined halachically as a wall, we're going to call it a mechitza. Even if you have vines planted all the way to the wall on one side, and the thickness of the wall, let's say, is a tefach and a half, doesn't matter. And you have to have 4 amas of space prior to you planting any other foreign plant near a vineyard. If there is a wall, you can plant a foreign plant mamish on the other side of the wall. And now we have to define what's a wall. So says the Mishnah, here are the rules. A kana is a vertical stick. We're speaking about a mechitza that's not one slab of wood, which is how you would envision a mechitza. It's not one fence that's going from right to left, but you have poles that were inserted in the ground, and pole number 2 is close to pole number 1. Pole number 3 is close to pole number 2. Who remembers the halacha? Dan, you remember? How close do they have to be for us to say halachically that they are connected? Lavud, less than 3 tvachim. Okay, so that's the first rule of the Mishnah. That mechitza sakonim, if you have a mechitza, but it's not one glob, it's not physically one continuum, it's simply sticks near each other in ein sham bein kana lechavedo. As long as you don't have as a space between one and the other 3 tvachim or more, you don't have that. You have less. In other words, it has to be even a drop, but it has to be less than 3 tvachim. And what's the shear of 3 tvachim? Yes, we know it's halacha l'Moshe Sinai, but here we are using words kedei sheyikanis hagedi. If there would be 3 tvachim or more than a typical domesticated animal, but which one? The gedi animal would easily be able to pass through these 2 poles. And since that's something that's in the realm of common and possible, that somehow breaks the connectivity that you would like to make. But since you don't have the 3 tvachim, so a gedi cannot easily squeeze his or her way through it. Therefore, we say, Harei zu kemechitza. What's the chiddush, guys? I want to say what the chiddush is. You know what that means? It means if I planted the vineyard all the way up until these vertical poles, even though there are many openings, the pole themselves can be as skinny as you want. The poles can be as skinny as you want. As long as the space between one pole and the other is less than 3 tvachim, they are considered connected. I can plant on the other side of these poles any other foreign plant, even not only on this side of the pole vine, on the other side of the pole barley. No, I can plant them even in the part where physically there is no pole.
Like the wall of the sukkah has to be.
Mamish, guys, very good. Thank you, Dan. The luras I mentioned in the intro, Hilcha Shabbos, Hilcha Sukkah. Mamish, the same thing.
Yeah.
I'm mentioning Shabbos because the Gemara is going to speak about Hilcha Shabbos. But you're right, that's called love. So that's rule number 1.
You don't need 4 amos. Sorry, you don't need 4 amos on the other side of the wall.
That's bachlal by any wall. Not only do you not need 4 amos, you don't even need 6 tvachim.
Got it.
You don't need anything. In one side, and here we're saying even more than that, because if you can imagine in your mind such a wall, you have a lot more open space and closed space. Just for the record, you're going to have what I'm saying right now is going to go against the rule we're going to learn later, because lavud means it's halachically considered closed. Lavud means it's halachically considered closed completely. So you can plant on either side of this wall, no matter whether it's opposite the beam or whether it's opposite the open space physically. That's number 1. Now, let me go further. What happens if you have an opening, whether you have a konim fence, a konim mechitza? What happens if you have an actual physical, you have a plywood wall. You have a wall. But there is an opening in the wall that's 3 tvachim or more. In other words, you cannot use lavud. Doesn't matter. We're going to use another logic. The other logic is called Pesach. Pesach means that it's normal for people to make entrance ways in walls. Every room that you have in your house, you have walls, but you have a doorway, an entrance way, a Pesach. A Pesach doesn't break the mechitz. But if the gap between the 2 sides is so large, and we'll see the cutoff is 10 amas, there'll be a point which is when it's really more than 10 amas. Actually, if it's exactly 10 amas, it's like less than 10 amas. If it's more than 10 amas, it's not called a Pesach, then it's called a Piritza. The word Piritza means a breach. And there'll be a huge difference whether we view the openings as a Pesach versus a Piritza. Let's read it inside. Now, the Godar Shenifratz, if you have a fence, if you have a wall where you have a breach means it's 3 tvachim or more. So if it's less than 3 tvachim, even though physically it's opened, halachically it's closed. But now let's go, you don't have level. So here's another rule, and that is Deser Amis. If it's up until 10 amis, and really, I'm not going to repeat this every time, but that's the rule. If it's until 10 amis, Hareo Pesach, and then what? Then I can plant on this side of the opening of the Pesach vines, and I can plant mamish on the opposite side of this opening barley. I'm just using that as an example. Again, even though physically they're mamish adjacent, they're not mixed, but why? Because there is a wall. I there is physically no wall here. There is a wall. It's called a Pesach. But Yoisen Mikan, but if the breach, if the opening in the wall is more than 10 amis, Yoisen Mikan, then another Gavaldik Edin. It doesn't mean, Kevan, that you may not plant at all anywhere on this side or on that side. No, wherever there's the physical wall. Now, the Mishnah doesn't say how big does that have to be, and I'm telling you right now, we're going to have this later in the Gemara. As long as the solid part of the wall is at least 4 tefachim, guys, remember this rule, even though the Mishnah doesn't say it. Then, on one side of the 4 tefach wall, you can plant a kerem, and on the other side, you can plant a foreign plant. But when it comes to the open space, that you can't do. Yoisen mikan mikeneged hapirtze is asur, which means that if it's 10 amis or less, and therefore we don't define it as a pirtza, but yes, we define it as a pesach. You can mamish plant opposite the opening, just like we had before by Lobit. Now let's go to another rule. These are big rules. Nifrutzu boy piratzei sarbe. Now, when we're speaking about piratzes, just for the record, then we're speaking about breaches that are 3 tvachim or more, up until 10 amas, but not more than 10 amas. We already said that if it's more than 10 amas, then that area is not walled. Yeah. Well, 15 feet.
Yeah.
Correct. But if you have these openings that are between 3 tvachim and 10 amas, how many of them do we tolerate to say, it's only an entranceway, and therefore it's halachically considered walled? There is a limit. What's the limit, says the Mishnah? What will be the sum total of physical wall versus the openings? Which one is bigger than which one? If at the end of the day, measure the walls, and if it's one wall, measure this one wall. Don't forget, we're not talking about Hilchas Shabbos. We don't need to have 3 or 4 walls. We're not talking about a sukkah. It can even be one wall, right? On one wall, okay, but on this side you can plant vines. On the other side, you can plant any other farm plant. I have these openings. These openings are not more than 10 amas. So I don't have the problem of pirza, but there's so many openings. If at the end measure, if you have more standing than openings, and another rule the Mishnah doesn't write, or even if it's equal, or even if it's exactly equal, then you're still good. Mutter means not only can I plant opposite the solid walls, I can even plant on opposite sides of the entranceway that is not walled. Yes, but if this is the bet, but if there is more a breach than standing, these are very important words that we have to remember also when it comes to Hilchas Eiruvin. Then keneged hapirtza also. Keneged hapirtza is also, which means opposite the opening you can't. Even though you can't do it opposite the opening, but again, as long as the solid part of any part of the wall is 4 tefachim wide, we're not even talking about the heights, or more, then by that part you can plant kerem on this side and a foreign plant on the other side. But on the openings, since it's parutz meruma ala oimed, you cannot do it. Guys, these rules are the foundational rules. And let's begin with the Braisa. Like we mentioned, that the Braisa that the Gemara is going to quote will have some exceptions. Both L'Kula and L'Chuma. Says the Gemara. And again, the Gemara is quoting the Asa Pasin is a Braisa. The word Pasin means a board. Kanem means a reed. Pasin means a board. Says the Mishnah. Asa Pasin keneged ha beinayin. Now listen to this. Now here, Kevan, I need a picture. If you can imagine in your mind, even without a picture, rows of vines. You have a vineyard. We already learned before. 2 rows, 20 rows, at least 2 rows. Let's say you have 10 rows of vines. I don't care if you have 3 in every one or 50 in every one. You have an area that was designated for a vineyard. And a person wanted to build a wall on that side of the vineyard. And for some reason, then, they dafke did not put any wall adjacent the vine itself. In between the rows, there's space. They only put the wall to cover the area between the rows. That's called pasin keneged habeinayin. They built the wall only opposite the spaces. That means if I'm on the other side of the wall, when I look in, if I were to look in, I'm going to see the vines. The wall is only blocking me from seeing the space in between the vines. That's the mitzias over here. Now, I want to tell you like this. Let me say these words. Such a partition, such a wall, is halachically less significant. If a person is building a wall in a way where at least some solid segments opposite the vines are covered, that's a greater wall. That's a better wall. Why is that a better wall vis-a-vis the laws of Kalayim? Because what's the goal of Kalayim? The goals of Kalayim is that we don't want for the vines to appear to be mixed with something else. If this guy built a partition in a way where he dafka only partitioned off the empty areas in the vineyard, the vines remain visible. If I'm going to plant on the other side, there is a higher chance that it's going to look mixed with the vines because there is no mechitza to the vines at all. You understand? So since this type of wall is less significant, so therefore we're not going to follow the rules of the Mishnah. We're going to be a little bit more machmer. Says the Braisa, the yesh ba'oimed arba'am. Here we have the words that I quoted in the Mishnah. Now, whenever you have a wall that has a lot of breaks in it, that has a lot of breaches in it, even if the breaches are classified as a Pesach, we need for the solid part of the wall, when it comes to these halachas, to have at least 4 tfachim of width.
Wait, how many? Yeah, I'm sorry. In this case, you have a bunch of rows of whatever. How many walls do you have?
Think about it, Kevan. Halachically, as the Mishnah is defining it, as one wall, halachically. On the west side of the vineyard, you built a wall, but you built a wall with many entranceways.
Got it.
As we learned in the Mishnah, as long as the spaces between the boards are not more than 10 amas, it's considered one wall. Happens to be that he dafka purposefully, every time there's an opening, he left the opening by the vine itself. He only closed in the areas between the vines. If the standing section has 4 tfachim, and even though the oimed is Rabba ala parutz, and the rules in the Mishnah based on these 2 criteria, right, would allow you to plant in the entirety of the opposite side, because it's not a pirza, it's only a Pesach. You have a oimed meruba ala parutz, or even equal, is also the same thing. Says the Brais, in this case we'll make an exception. Because since the wall to begin with, like we mentioned, is, let's say, is less halachically significant, it's a shvacha wall, it's a halachically weak wall. So yes, keneged ha'emed is muter, but keneged ha'pirza is also, again, and normally, Kevan, what we would say that since the breaches are not 10 amas, they're not more than 10 amas, and since the totality of that side is oimed, rabba ala paretz, you would be allowed to plant everywhere, not over here, because you have a weak wall. So that's one exception. And now we're going to turn to the Flamet Chesam and Beis, and we're going to go to the same idea, but in the opposite direction. And again, we're going to have an exception. What happens if Asa Pasim only can get like a fun? Guy built a wall, but he didn't make one slab. He made, boards, openings, and he dafka placed the boards to contain the vines. Wherever there is a road, that's where he placed the board. Let's say the guy built a vineyard in a way where you have, let's say, 5 amas between every row. Those 5 amas are open. It's not more than 10. But the guy built the wall in a way that the wall dafka covers only the vines and not the openings. That's called asa pasin, on top of daf lamet ches, keneged hagafanim. And let's go further. And now the standing sections that are blocking off the vines don't even have 4 amas. That's one negative. Let me go to the next negative. The haparutz rabba al ha'omed, and if you were to measure the side of the wall, you end up with more breach than standing. And based on the rules of the Mishnah, you know what the rules of the Mishnah would be? You cannot plant anything on the other side of any part of the wall. Because Paratz Munobalo Oimed destroys the wall. But still, we said, even though the wall is destroyed, if the slab is 4 tfachim, then you can plant on the opposite side. Here, the slabs are not even 4 tfachim. So, there is no heter of the wall. Here, you will have a heter of a wall, not on the open area. No, since the guy placed the wall in a way where he dafka closed off the vines, it makes this wall halachically even more significant. Then we're going to skip the pshita. We're going to go with how we're going to keneged ha'oimed muter. Even though the oimed is not 4 tfachim wide, which is what you normally need. However, even over here, even though you're giving this wall a lot of credibility, but there's a limit to it. Keneged ha'pirtza is also mamish beautiful. If you put it opposite the vines, it makes the wall more powerful. It makes the wall more significant. Okay, Atkan. So we have the rules in the Mishnah, and now we have this exception in the Braisa, both L'Kula and L'Chumra, which is Gavaldik. Now, Atkan the Tanoim. Now we're going into Amoyroim. And now we will introduce a halacha that's so very relevant when it comes to, we're going to go to Hilchas Shabbos, and I'll play even more when it comes to Hilchas Seder. And that is called Itzuras HaPesach. What's called Itzuras HaPesach? Itzuras HaPesach means that when you have a kana, a reed, can be skinny, but if you have a vertical pole to the right, and you have at some point a vertical pole to the left, and you have a third, whether it's a pole, whether it's a string, what we're going to call it a kana, a vertical pole that's on top, it's resting on top, horizontal, and let me say these words, on top, not on the side of the top, on top. That's called the Tzuras HaPesach. I'm emphasizing the top because when it comes to the making of an Eruv, right, even though the Eruv does not have to be built, the Shem Eruv. So if, let's say, not telephone wires, electric wires. If you remember, it used to be, and it still is in many third world countries, that there's a lot of wires in the street. It's not on the ground yet. And basically you have a pole, and at some point you have another pole, and you have wires through which goes electricity, through which goes the telephone. If those wires would have been placed on the top would mean, just as an example, you have a pole, on top of the pole you would knock in, let's say, a nail, and around the nail you would wind a rope, and then you would wind the rope on the top. That's called the Tzuras HaPesach. If it's coming on the side, we're going to speak about it more in a moment. It's problematic. We don't use that. That's one of the challenges when a city builds an Eruv. Why don't you just use the electricity? Because most of them don't have the halachic minimum of a Tzuras HaPesach. I want to speak up now that we're talking about it. I want to say one more nekuda, that there appears to be a machlokes Bavli and the Yerushalmi, and that is there a minimum distance between the two vertical poles of it, in which we say that if it's too far apart, we don't use the Tzuras HaPesach, which would be the 10 amos, or we don't care. Even if it's way more than 10 amos, guys, I know that Dan said before 10 amos is a lot. I agree that when it comes to a breach in a wall, when you make an entranceway, even in your garage, when you're driving to your home, how big is the entranceway?
8 feet.
8 feet, very good. In other words, if you have it more than 15 feet, it's not more than 15 feet. You don't need that. That's called a breach. It's even a double gate. I would, you know what? Maybe a double gate is 15 feet.
Yeah.
We're more like, in other words. Okay, he's no, not a 2-car garage. I didn't mean
the 2-car garage is about 18 feet.
Vlad, the entranceway when you drive into your home. When I drive into my home, I'm talking about
not 9.5 to 10.
9.5, 10. It's not 15 feet. Shkoyach. So for Hilchas Shabbos, if you want to have, say, my front yard is a Reshus HaYachid because it's closed off. I actually have on my front yard. I have a lot of I have a plant fence, but it's a fence. But then I have an entranceway. Doesn't matter. It's not more than 10 amas, and I have more standing I have more standing than open. That's mamash what we're learning. It's considered completely closed off. Now, what happens if it's too big? You know what people do for Hilchas Shabbos? They put a wire. We're going to learn right now, is that effective? Suras HaPesach, to make a wall. Or do we say that even by the Suras HaPesach, I need to have both side vertical poles to be within 10 amas? We're gonna touch on that in a moment. Okay, but let's begin. The way our sugya uses the word Suras HaPesach, interestingly, is not by using the word Suras HaPesach, but we're using the word Peya. Peya means, literally, Peya means a braid. Peya Sorosh, a braid. Just typically, I know that today we have technology, we have materials that they didn't have then. When you would have a beam on the right and a beam on the left, even if it's within 10 amas is 15 feet, for you to put something on top and for it to endure, it has to be something solid. Now, of course, you can put a beam of wood. People didn't want to spend wood on that. So they would take one rope would be too flimsy then. They would take a few ropes, they would braid them, means they would intertwine them. They would dray them. The way people, play around with your payas, the Hasidim, they make a paya, they make a lock, they make it windy. That's the meaning of paya. But it's just a way they would put the one on the top. They would take something and they would paya it, so it will become sturdier, and then they would connect it from one onto the other. Says the Gemara. Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish says in the name of Rabbi Yehuda ben Chanina. I don't know. I'm saying that's what we're saying. I want to say another thing about paya that we have a few times whenever the Chazal speak about a married woman covering her hair. What was very common then was not the type of, I think a paya is what they call how do you call a sheitel in Hebrew? Paya. But let me tell you that word is from the Mishnah. But you know how they did it then? Today a woman has a comb and she just puts the whole thing on top of her hair. They would actually take hair, not their own, and they would paya it. They would knot it with their own hair. Extensions. Thank you. Just that's how. And the extensions would cover all their hair. That's what we all learned about. Can you go with that on Shabbos? If you're going to the mikvah, you might undo it, and then you might not put it. And how can you do it? You're making a kesher. You have all these issues we learned about when we learned Masechta Shabbos. But the peyas haroish, which was the solution that many women have who are married, who are covering the hair, but they don't want to go out with a shmata on their head. They want to go out with hair. Is a peya. It's an expression. And peya here would mean is that you're tying the rope on top of one pole and on top of the other. You have to tie it. If not, you don't have a Suras HaPesach.
They had shaitels back then?
Sure, that the shaitels that I just mentioned. Sure, they had shaitels back then. Every time a woman had to go to the mikvah, it was Yana Maisa. When women today are complaining about what's it called, the nails, I forgot what it's called. That type of nail that it takes, who knows, an hour to put it on. The gel, thank you, the gel nails. Imagine what they needed to do with the shaitels. If you have to knot it on and knot it off and knot it on. Okay, so here you go. Knots. Now, what happens if you have arba konim ba'arba zavi shavakedem? You have a vineyard. And by the way, the Rabbi Yehuda ben Chanina is not giving any limit to the length of the vineyard. I want to emphasize that because it doesn't matter how big it is. And all this guy did was he wants to be able to plant outside the vineyard. He doesn't want to lose 4 amas of a space. So he wants to use the method of building a wall. He doesn't want to build a wall. He wants to build the minimal wall possible. Forget about loving. Have a better idea. He only needs to have 4 beams of wood. 1 beam in every corner. One little reed in each corner. And then he's going to connect the top of the beams in each direction with a Suras HaPesach, with a peya. The kosher gemi milmailo, he's using a reed, says in the name of Rabbi Yehuda ben Chanina, matzel mishum peya amachayim. That's what we call in Hilchas Shabbos. It would say matzel mishum Suras HaPesach. It means the same thing. Since he properly connected the reed to the top of the beams, we consider that as a bona fide wall, even though there's no wall. You're talking about oimed meruma ala parutz. You're kidding. Parutz meruma ala oimed is an understatement. There's no parutz. Begashmi is there's no wall. You just have 4 reeds. Guys, Kevin is busy painting since Levitic over here.
It makes sense. The whole point is not it's
Mhm.
not actually the physical.
Thank you.
Okay, I want to just repeat what Ido was saying. What we continuously learn is that it's so clear that if the issue would be that God does not want for the two plants to draw nourishment one from the other, then how would this work? Even by Kilei HaKedem, the aspect of Maras Ayin is essential. Now, the Chiddush is that you can argue, how do you have a Maras Ayin solution when you don't have a wall? No, it's called a wall. Okay. Now, again, the fact that Rav Shimon ben Lakish, B'Shem Rabbi Yehuda ben Chanina, did not give any limitation to how much space is there between one reed and the other, between one corner and the other, that implies that even if it's more than 10 amas, doesn't matter. The 10 amas limitation in our Mishnah is only when you have boards and you have a breach in the board. So we're saying that if it's more than 10 amas, that's a breach. But when it comes to Tzuras HaPesach is stronger than the wall in the Mishnah. So even though it's more than 10 amas, it doesn't matter. Okay. Now I'm making a statement right now that you're going to push back on, because in the Babli it appears that this statement is incorrect. We're beginning with the premise, guys, that when it comes to Hilchos Shabbos means when we're making an Eruv. Over there, when you're using a Tzuras HaPesach to enclose an area, to render it into a Reshus HaYachid, by Shabbos, you are limited to the 10 amas. That's the way the Yerushalmi is learning. I want to make it for the record that in the Bavli and in Halacha, when you have Eruvin in the city, the Eruvin that they make with Tzuras HaPesach is not limited. It has to be 10 amas or less. We don't do that because we don't paskin that there is such a limitation. It appears from the Yerushalmi that when it comes to Hilchos Shabbos, you do have that limitation. There is a Rosh, just to say, there is a Rosh in Bavli that quotes this Yerushalmi. And for him to reconcile, he says, 1 second. He says that there is a big difference whether you're making a Tzuras HaPesach in an area where people are living, which is in a city, which is what we are doing in LA or any other city that has an Eruv, versus if you're making an Eruv in Catalina, in an area that's called a Bika, in a place that's not inhabited. If you're making an Eruv in a place where it's not inhabited, so argues the Rosh, even the Bavli would agree to the premise of the Yerushalmi that you can make a Tzuras HaPesach, but between one beam and the other, you can't have more than 10 amas. Everyone will agree to it. Or on the other hand, if you're building a Tzuras HaPesach in an area that people are living in for some reason, there, even the Yerushalmi would agree that you are allowed to have more than 10 amas between one vertical pole and the other. I'm just saying the Rosh, Kasha, we have 5 minutes. Just remember, put that on the shelf. Just the premise of the Yerushalmi is that by Shabbos, you are bound with the limitation of 10 amas. Okay. In other words, let's quote Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, even though it's in the name of Rabbi Yehuda ben Chanina, that Rabbi Lakish is saying that the laws of Kalayim and the laws of Shabbos are not aligned. We are more lenient by Kalayim. We allow for the Tzuras HaPesach to take effect, even though there's a huge space, a mile. Today with technology, with the wiring, maybe it can somehow not, it will not belly in, whatever that's called. When you put a rope between two poles and the other,
Sag.
It won't sag. And you need all of it to be above 10 tefachim. As long as it's not sagging within 10 tefachim above the ground, you're good to go. And by Shabbos, we don't have that. So he holds they're not on the same page. However, Rabbi Yoina argues, that's the machlokes here, that Omar Rabbi Yoina, no, they follow the same rules. Kemechitzas Shabbos, kemechitzas Kalayim. Which means that you can use the Tzuras HaPesach and a plant on this side, the vineyard, and the other side, barley, as long as the space between the vertical poles is not more than 10 amas. So there's a machlokes, it's by Shabbos, the Yerushalmi holds everyone is bound by the 10 amas. Are you bound with that between one pole and the other vertically? Machlokes between Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yoina. Says the Gemara, Amar Rabbi Yechanan, I will back up the shita of Rabbi Yoina. This is the most agadah that we'll get in the Yerushalmi. This is a story that's a non-story story. Don't get so excited. That Ma'aseh Shalach Rabbi Shua ben Karcha. Tanoim. He went to Rabbi Yechanan ben Nuri to a place called Linag Ninar and Hero saw the Achas. Who showed who? We're going to go. That Rabbi Shua ben Karcha showed Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri a certain field. Ubeis Chaverta Hoisa Mikreis. That area was called Beis Chaverta. And the Hoyasham Perotzes Yoisem Eser. Now they were speaking about a wall. And the breaches in the wall were more than 10 ames. What did we learn in our Mishnah? That if the breaches of the wall are more than 10 ames, you cannot plant by the breach area on this side kerem and on that side that. But the people there wanted to use all of the space. So what did Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri do to fix it? Oin, guys, just today is Rosh Hashanah LaChasidus. Today is Yutas Kislev Tachan Pehei. So just quoting from the Alter Rebbe and Tanya Perek Chavtes, he quotes the Zajac that speaks about a teaching that was learned in the Masifta Derakia, and the words just is this mamish aho the loy salik beina hoydam abachanli. If you have a log that's not catching fire, you splinter the log. So this is the word. That's the aho ohin. That ohin, you get it? That if ohin means a piece of wood. He took a piece of wood. The soisem doik ranim and the soisem achamiyatim pachos. He would seal the breaches vertically. He filled in the space until what? Until there was less than 10 amas. And Omar, he himself, Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri said, Kozeh kein mechitza Shabbos. So clearly you see over here that whatever is invalid for Shabbos, he said those words, whatever is invalid for Shabbos is invalid for Kalayim. So therefore, when you are using Tzuras HaPesach, which was not the case over there, but when you're using Tzuras HaPesach, you're also bound to the 10 amos. Amar Rav Zeira, that Moed Hashem Melakish. Hashem Melakish is more lenient by Kalayim. Lenient Shabbos, She'ein Apeh Matzelos Yosem, as we just said. No, it's clearly, he's only lenient by Kalayim, but he's not lenient by Shabbos. Which means when you're building an Eruv, he also agrees that you may not have more than 10 amas between one vertical pole and the other. How do we know that? You're right. You're right that Reb Shimon ben Lakish has to agree to this when it comes to Hilchos Shabbos. What Mishnah? So according to Mishnah of Masechtos Eruvin in the Bavli Daf Tezayin Amud Beis, the Mishnah says, guys, we're so familiar with this case. I know it's getting a bit late. That Makif and Shloisha Chavolim Zelamaylam Izeh. That if you want to encircle an area to be able to carry on Shabbos, and I want you to know, I'm going now to Hilchos Sukkah because people do this for Sukkah. You don't have a wall. You want to make the minimum wall that's halachically a wall. All you need to do is you need to have 3 ropes. So you build a vertical pole on one side, a vertical pole on the other side. Now, if you place the first rope within 3 tfachim from the ground, lavud, it's as if it's touching the ground. Then you go up and you make another. You put the second rope. As long as the second rope is within 3 tfachim of the bottom rope, lavud. What are you looking for? You're looking to build a halachic mechitza that needs to have 10 tfachim of height. If every one is within 3 tefach of the one underneath it, including the one underneath the ground, you need to have 3 ropes. But as long as you have 3 ropes, then you have a halachic mechitza. People do it right now when they build a sukkah. They have tarp. The issue with tarp is not an issue. The issue with tarp is not the tarp. It's the issue that it moves too much. It's very hard to make a tarp that's fully solid, even though we do it. So many people, not to go into the tarp is blowing too much in the wind. That's what they do to make sure it's halachic. Well, they do the solution. Makif and shloisha chavolim. Now, says Rab Chagai, I have a very simple thing, that if you would be allowed by Shabbos and by Sukkah to make a Tzuras HaPesach, even though the beams are one farther one from the other, why would you have to waste 3 ropes? Why would you build 3 ropes on the bottom? Take only 1 rope and put the rope on the top and you have a Tzuras HaPesach. Is arayah? We're speaking about a case where the distance between one vertical and the other is more than 10 amas. So you don't have the option of Tzuras HaPesach. That was Israel. So Dayer Chevel Echad. We'll stop over here. Gavaldik. I know it's a bit late. And
why can't we do this for Sukkot? Just run one wire on top.
I don't understand. Instead of lovely, just put one on top.
Okay, I want to say that we do not allow for this to happen by Sukkot, just for the record. Even if it's less than 10.
Meaning, well, we're learning from Kiwayim and Shabbos that you can have one on top that makes a
That makes a wall, and we are saying according to Reb Shimon ben Lakish that by Kalayim we don't care how far the vertical poles are. He's moided that by Shabbos, for Shabbos, forget about Sukkah. For Shabbos, it would not work. What's the proof? Why did the Mishnah tell you, if you have 3 ropes, you have a good solution? The Mishnah could have told you a better solution. If you have 1 rope, you might not have a solution. Put it on top. It's because, no, you can't do it. Surah HaPesach when there are more than 10 amas apart.
I feel like you need 4 ropes. And not 3.
We're going to stop over here. We don't need 4 ropes. 3 ropes is enough. And I know we didn't finish the daf yet, but we're good.